Hey everyone, in this video lecture we are going to cover the topic about cellular respiration. Alright, if we're talking about how cells get their energy, we are going to be talking about a process called cellular respiration. For this process, the main ingredient or the main reactant that is necessary for this process to occur is glucose, which is the most simple carbohydrate out there. And glucose is used in the mitochondria of a cell in order to make ATP energy. So, we're going to talk about the actual steps that go into converting that glucose into ATP energy via cellular respiration. So, how organisms get those carbohydrates? So, if you are an autotroph or a plant that is able to make their own carbs using energy from the sun, okay, they use photosynthesis to actually create glucose. So, they're converting ingredients into simple sugar in the form of glucose. That is their source of carbohydrates. The majority of organisms are heterotrophs, or organisms that have to eat other organisms that already have carbohydrates in them to get that source of carbohydrate in order to do cellular respiration. So autotrophs make their own glucose, whereas heterotrophs eat things that contain glucose. That glucose then is going to enter the mitochondria in order to make ATP. That is the process of cellular respiration. So both plant and animal cells can do cellular respiration. It's a very common misconception to think that plants only do photosynthesis and animals only do respiration. However, both plants and animal cells are going to be doing cellular respiration because they both need ATP. Plant cells just have to do photosynthesis first in order to make their glucose, whereas animal cells are getting that glucose from the organisms that they eat. So, in terms of the chemical equation for respiration, the reactants or the ingredients needed for respiration to occur, you need at least one glucose molecule, and glucose molecularly is C6H12O6. You need 6 oxygen molecules for that one glucose molecule. And then what that's going to create during cellular respiration is 6 water molecules, 6 carbon dioxide molecules, and ATP. So the water and the carbon dioxide, those are considered byproducts. They are things that were not intended to be created during respiration. They're not necessary. So they're just released from the cell as waste. Whereas the ATP energy molecule, that is the goal of cellular respiration. So, how this all is happening inside of a cell. So, really, this process is occurring within your mitochondria. So, this is a diagram showing the structure of the mitochondria. It kind of looks like a little insect, if you will. And so, there are two membranes to your mitochondria. There's an outer membrane as well as an inner membrane. And that inner membrane is folded on itself. And those folds where you have the kind of fold of that inner membrane, we call that a cristae. And then the inside of that inner membrane, that intercellular space, we call the matrix. So there are different parts of cellular respiration that are going to occur at different parts within that mitochondria. So there are 4 main steps in order to make ATP. We're going to walk through each of these steps and talk about where ATP is created, how it's created, going through each of these different steps. So step 1 is called glycolysis. And that word, the root of it is very similar to glucose, and the second half of it, lysis, means to split. So, what we're doing in glycolysis is we are splitting up glucose molecules and making a new molecule called pyruvate. This is occurring outside of your mitochondria. This is happening in the cytoplasm of the cell. And this step does generate a little bit of ATP. 2 ATP molecules are created, but that's not enough to sustain cells that are doing lots of work. So that pyruvate is going to then be the ingredient that goes in to the rest of the steps of cellular respiration. So after glycolysis, that pyruvate will go through what we call a link reaction. So that's going to convert pyruvate into a new molecule called acetyl-CoA. The CoA stands for coenzyme A. So at this step, really no ATP is created or made. We are just making a new molecule that will then go on to help create those ATP molecules. So that acetyl coenzyme A will then enter the Krebs cycle, which is a series of steps that is creating molecules that are going to carry electrons. Now not going to go super into detail about why we need these electron carrying molecules. They are important, but at this step we have created a little bit more ATP. So two more ATP molecules have been created. This Krebs cycle is occurring in that matrix space of your mitochondria. That's the space inside the inner membrane. Now, the products, the molecules that carry electrons, they are then going to move on to the next step of cellular respiration called the electron transport chain. This is also referred to as chemiosmosis because what we're going to have happen is molecules moving through the inner membrane of the mitochondria, and this is going to create a gradient of protons, those positive parts of a atom. They're going to be moving through that inner membrane, and that gradient of having a high and low concentration of protons on either side of that membrane is going to allow an enzyme that lives in the inner membrane called ATP synthase to basically start turning. And as it's turning, that enzyme is generating lots and lots of ATP molecules. So at this step, the electron transport chain, we are getting roughly 34 ATP molecules. So this is very intensive in terms of creating those energy molecules. And this is the true product of cellular respiration. But one piece of important information we need to talk about is one important ingredient for cellular respiration to occur is oxygen. When oxygen is present, cells are using what we call aerobic cellular respiration. All those steps we just walked through is aerobic cellular respiration. Oxygen was present, and this generates anywhere from 34 to 38 ATP molecules. And this is the preferred route of cells generating ATP because it makes a good quantity of ATP. However, there are times when your cells need ATP, but there is not enough oxygen present. So if there's not enough oxygen, cells will switch over to anaerobic cellular respiration. This does generate ATP, but significantly less. Only about 2 ATP molecules are created. And again, this is because there's not enough oxygen, so cells are doing a different reaction to generate that ATP. So, if we compare aerobic and anaerobic cellular respiration, so all of these processes need glucose as that starting molecule. Then that glucose goes through glycolysis to generate pyruvate. But this is where we branch off and two different reactions will occur depending on whether oxygen is present or not. So if oxygen is present, that pyruvate will go through the Krebs cycle and then through the electron transport chain to generate roughly 36 ATP. But if oxygen is not present, that pyruvate will then go through a process called fermentation. And the byproduct of that in animal cells is lactic acid, or if we're talking about yeast, the byproduct is ethanol. This step generates only 2 ATP, so significantly less, but still some energy. So cells, when there is not enough oxygen to go around, they can do anaerobic respiration to get a little bit of ATP. So fermentation is the process that brewers use to generate ethanol, a form of alcohol. If you're an animal cell and you're using fermentation, that lactic acid, so if you've ever done any sort of exercise and you feel a burn in your muscles, that burn is the buildup of lactic acid in your muscle cells. And that is the byproduct of not having enough oxygen for cellular respiration to occur.